Hi, good morning. This is Priya here. I'm here to present on my text analysis. I've used two textbooks, the lower primary science textbook on interactions and the lower secondary school physical science. Both the topics are on heat, and so I'll be talking about contraction and expansion in solid, liquid, and gas. This is my first text taken from the primary science, and this is my second text of the lower secondary school physical text. This is my typed out version of my text 1, and this is my typed out version of text 2. Now let's look at the purpose of this analysis. It's for me to understand the difficulties faced by students in terms of reading and understanding the concepts presented in the textbook, and also as a teacher to help me choose the best strategy to help in their comprehension skills and to identify thematic formation or thematic pattern present in the textbook. Now, why it is important? Because in primary school or in secondary school, if you notice, due to branding, schools tend to stick to one particular type of textbook, and regardless whether it's easier for students to understand their concepts or not. And also to use this text analysis and to show how, as teachers, we should be able to choose a better science text which is appropriate for students of different age groups as well as academics abilities. Okay, in terms of the choice of text, I chose one secondary school and one primary school. Okay, the topics that I chose was something which is a bit difficult for pupils to understand because it's matter, it's a bit abstract, so they have difficulty in understanding and remembering the technical terms. And also as a teacher, I want to have a better understanding on how difficult it is for pupils and to help them in terms of their teaching and learning. And since I chose a secondary school and a primary school text, I want to understand the language barrier which they might have in terms of moving from primary to secondary, as in like how different are the words they have used to explain the same concept. Let us now look at the choice of analytical tools. For the basic text analysis, I've gone through lexical density, abstraction, technicality, and authoritativeness using the SFL framework. As for thematic analysis, I've identified medium, process, and participants, conjunctions and circumstances, and I've also looked at the lexical relations. And finally, I've used Lemke's SFL framework to analyze the thematic pattern. Alright, this table consists of the thematic analysis of my primary text. So you can see that I've broken them into clause, and I've analyzed the conjunctions, the mediums, processes, and the circumstances. Okay, and this is the continuation of my primary text as well. Table 2 is the analysis of my secondary text, and the continuation of table 2 in terms of analyzing my secondary school text. Let's look at the basic text analysis. If you look at the primary text, there are 22 clauses, 44 technical words, so the lexical density comes up to 36.9%. There was one normalization in which is the surrounding, whereas for secondary text, there were 24 clauses, 49 technical words, so which means 31% of lexical density. There were two types of normalization, expansion and contraction. I have highlighted all the verbs in both text 1 and text 2. They are in red. Let's compare the verbs used in text 1 and text 2. Both did not have any mental process verbs such as recall or let us look at, whereas they both had lots of material process verbs, which are the key features of explanatory text. And also I noticed that in text 1, the author used sufficient amount of relational material process verbs to introduce new technical terms, whereas in text 2 there was a limited usage of relational material process verbs, which I assume that the author has assumed that the students who are reading should be well known to the technical terms used in the text. Let's compare the conjunctive usage in text 1 and text 2. Text 1 had a few temporal and additive, but one of condition, sequence, and comparative. Temporal and additive was to establish relationship between the various events, and there were not much of consequence and comparison of the events. Whereas in text 2, there was sufficient amount of temporal and comparative. This was to establish a causal relation between the contrasting events, such as what happens during expansion and what happens during contraction. Let's look at the lexical relations for primary text. There weren't any synonym, but there were plenty of antonym like expand, contract, heat, cool, lose, gain, decrease, increase. And there were many repetition in terms of gains, expand, contracts, and loses. The contrast, I would say, was heat gain, heat loss. As for composition, as in like part whole, I would say matter, and then you have the, which is the whole, and then you have the part, which is solid, liquid, and gas. As for the lexical relation in secondary school, in terms of classification for antonym, there was expand, contract, heat, cool, thick, and thin. There was no synonym as well. In terms of repetition, we had two words, expands and contracts. In terms of contrast, it was increase in volume, decrease in volume. For composition, part whole, we had bread being the whole and dough being part of the bread. From the analysis, it was obvious that both the textbook are of explanatory genre because it explains how an event fits into or is different from another. It also describes the essential features of an event, like what happens during contraction and what happens during expansion. Let's now look at the basic level of synthesis. As for lexical densities of 39% and 31%, it shows that there's a fairly high level of density of information in both the texts. They are information loaded. There was some technical jargons used like expansion, contraction, clinical thermometers, and it was also noticed that in every clausal level there were nouns, main verbs, adjectives, and preposition and conjunctions were used. So at every clausal level there were many content words, and there were also many extended noun phrases made up of adjective and classifiers. So let's now look at this implication in terms of students based on the synthesis. So most of the students would be overthrown by the amount of information presented in both the texts, and as such they will not be able to process the information mentally or even visualize the process of expansion and contraction and what exactly happens through the matter, and they might not be interpreting the concepts properly. Whereas for weaker students who are at loss due to the lack of language and understanding, they will probably end up memorizing the terms and meaning without fully understanding the concept, and they will just try to answer by just regurgitating their knowledge. So now, how does this have an implication on teachers? As teachers, we should know that textbook should not be the only teaching resource, and we also have to realize that not all students understand what they have learned. So which means we need to choose the text wisely, which like basically look for text which has got more pictures to or description to help them to mentally visualize and process the event that's happening in terms of whereas in here will be expansion and contraction of the matter. And we can also try to break down the text in terms of clausal points or bite-sized phrases to help them in their understanding. And we can also come up with PowerPoint slides with lots of pictures, try to have mind maps so that they will have linkages to the concepts and understand. As you can see in my text one, whereas in which is for the primary text, there are a lot of pictures to show them what's happening in each of the different events. Whereas in the lower secondary school, there were only 2 pictures and there were not much of a use. So as a secondary school teacher, what we can do is source for our own pictures, carry out experiments so that students can visualize what's happening. Finally, for the overall synthesis, we have seen that both the textbook are of explanatory genre, both are information loaded, and they have a fairly complicated semantic relation. It also shows an extent of effort students need to put into form logical process and relationship to fully comprehend their text. and also that the implicit conjunctions actually makes a text passage harder for them to understand, and also shows how language is very crucial and is important to construct an understanding of a concept. And lastly, I will sum up the overall implications. It's very important for teachers to realize that they need to use multiple sources and pedagogical tools to teach and help pupils to comprehend the concepts. So models, pictorial diagrams are very important and useful for students. Even mind maps are very useful. And teachers should not assume that students are able to figure out the language, let alone science language, all by themselves. We need to help them to break down the language content into bite size so that they will be motivated to read and try to understand. And we can also try to help them to elicit the process in terms of bridging the gaps in terms of the logical relationship and the taxonomical relationship.